Hello. Somalia's Islamic court says it's now at war with Ethiopia. The courts have accused Ethiopia of shelling positions in courts-held territory.
Nearly 400 civilians have been killed and 550 wounded in fighting between insurgents and Ethiopian-backed troops in the Somali capital of Mogadishu just since Thursday. This, according to a local human rights.
You described the terrible scenes that are going on in Mogadishu. I just want to add that this is not only a terrible war, but also the most lawless war. It violates clearly the invasion by Ethiopia, the UN Charter, the support of the US and the attacks by the US violate the UN Charter. But in addition, there are two explicit UN resolutions by Security Council that this violates. The UN Security Council resolution in December said there should be no troops from regional neighboring countries going into Somalia as part of a peacekeeping force. And yet we have Ethiopian troops there, not as part of a peacekeeping force. It's also turned the whole region into a giant Guantanamo Bay.
The Gulf of Aden on the edge of the Red Sea is the only way in or out for ships entering and leaving the Suez Canal, making it one of the world's busiest and most important waterways. On any single day, millions of tons of goods travel through this narrow strait that connects east and west. It's a crucial supply line for world trade, and with over 3 million gallons of crude oil passing through here each day, interrupting this vital artery could send seismic tremors through world markets.
The Gulf of Aden is one of our major hubs for transnational shipping going through en route to the Suez Canal, and we're deployed here to contribute to the international effort to reduce the amount of piracy and to maintain the security of shipping throughout the region.
The Islamic Courts Union has vowed not to stop the fighting until they drive alleged Ethiopian forces in Somalia out of the country.
We are not going to stop the war. We did not start it. It is the Ethiopian forces who started it. We would like to assure the people of Somalia that this is not a battle between Somalis. It is a war between us and Ethiopia. We shall not end the fighting till we get the Ethiopians out of our country.
Ahmed Jimale here says the fighting between the Islamic courts and Somalia government backed by Ethiopia is inevitable. He says Ethiopia chose war with Somalis when it sent its troops into Somalia.
The toll from the Oman Peace and Human Rights Organization was the first comprehensive count of casualties from what aid agencies are calling the worst fighting in Somalia in 15 years. Nearly 50,000 people have fled Mogadishu in the last 10 days, according to the UN Refugee Agency. A total of 96,000 people left their homes during February and March. Ethiopian tanks, artillery, and helicopter gunships have fought against guerrillas armed with machine guns, missiles, and rocket-propelled grenades.
Human Rights Watch reported that over 100 people were kidnapped in Kenya, suspected supporters of the ICU, the Islamic courts, and to hand them over to Somalia, which in turn handed most of them over to Ethiopia, where they have disappeared. So this is really a terrible war, and another reason it's so terrible is because for 6 months last year, from June to December, as reported by Democracy Now!, as reported by the New York Times, BBC, Deutsche Welle, Xinhua News Agency, every media in the world reported that the Islamic Courts Union had brought a high level of stability to Somalia, and they had done so without the massive use of force. So this is just, a classic example of the U.S. overreaching, relentless drive for domination rather than caring for the stability and security of small nations.
What is the U.S.'s interest here?
Oh, it's also very clear. First of all, this is a crucial region. It's the Horn of Africa. Somalia is at the heart of the Horn of Africa. You have the Red Sea, through which tankers and military armadas flow every day. It's also a newly oil-rich region. We've had the Somali president in that region twice in a year, trying to negotiate deals. So the U.S. what they wanted in Somalia was what they wanted in Iraq. I mean, the similarities are quite astonishing. It's just that the world knows about Iraq. The media here does not cover Somalia at all, except as spot news. The U.S. began to say, once the Islamic Courts Union became dominant in Somalia last year, it began to say there is terrorism there, just like it said about Saddam Hussein, that he was linked to terrorists. It also began In Iraq, we had the weapons of mass destruction. Well, we have a weapon of mass destruction, according to the US, in Somalia, which is Muslims. Islamists are just routinely now conflated with extremists. So it gives the US, I shouldn't say the US, because I'm hoping that there will be a change in the US, and it will actually, a new Democratic majority, and the new president will do something about it. It gives them it has given the Bush administration the camouflage to impose its own client regime in Somalia, which will do its bidding. And the same for Ethiopia. Neither one of them actually cares for stability and security in Somalia. If they did, they would have engaged with the Islamic Courts Union. The Islamic Courts Union made repeated efforts to say to the West, we want to negotiate. Yes, they had a few hot agents there. They had some people who might even have been terrorists. But this was vastly exaggerated so that the US could pursue its goals.
Who are the Islamic Courts Union?
You know, it's very interesting. Despite the name, they were actually started by Somali businessmen. Somalis are great entrepreneurs. And even in the 15 years of violence, they have the best cell phone system. They've done amazing things in the chaos, Somali businessmen. But they wanted a more secure environment for themselves.
The TFG, the Transitional Federal Government in Somalia, and the Ethiopian government are some of the most oppressive regimes, yet the US backs them because they are against Islam. This is hypocritical, to say the least, and it will lead to defeat. It's just a question of when. Of course, I mean, that's his view on that, but I wonder what faith the US has in the TFG in Somalia and the current involvement of Ethiopia.
These pictures provide evidence of large roundups. The demonstrators are saying, save us, as they are led away to waiting trucks.
After all these people have died, the response has no place at the moment. It's not proportionate to what is happening to our people. People are dying.
This was the scene in Addis Ababa 6 months ago, as Channel 4 News exclusively revealed. University students protesting the results of Ethiopia's first free elections. They claim the government rigged the results against the opposition parties. The security forces responded with firepower and a wave of political arrests. At least 30 civilians were reportedly shot dead in June. These pictures provide evidence of large roundups. The demonstrators are saying, save us, as they are led away to waiting trucks. There have been more deaths and mass detentions since. Hailu Shaul is referring to Dedessa camp. Outside the capital, along this road to the west, and so far off limits to the media, Dedessa is a former military base. Reports from former detainees tell of thousands being rounded up and dumped there. I found one man who had just been released from the camp. The interview took place at night in the back of a car to avoid being spotted by the security services.
Some prisoners were blinded, some had their legs broken, and others had their teeth smashed. Because of all these beatings, some could not walk. There were some who were shot in the legs and were left lying on the ground. I saw 30 people dying. They'd been beaten, and people are still dying. There are 43,000 prisoners in the camp.
That Ethiopia gets a lot of credit for holding what a State Department official has recently described as free, fair, and transparent elections. But the last set of elections, the ruling party won 99.6% of the vote, and there's no one in the universe who would call that a democratic outcome, except maybe some people in the State Department. I should qualify that.
Yeah, and I covered that. And the truth is, although they won 99.6% of the seats in Parliament, they only won probably 50% of the votes. It's hard really to know, but it's first past the post, so they won all the seats.
We do not believe religious politics or politics of religion solves any problem, be it Christian or Muslim. We do not differentiate between moderate and radical religious tendency. It doesn't solve the problems of the real problems of communities and nations. How can one justify Eritrea sympathizing or supporting? The situation in Somalia is a completely different story. It's a problem of a nation that has disintegrated. It's a question of a nation that has gone into crisis, internal and external crisis. And that is the main issue in Somalia for us, at least in Eritrea. And Somalia is part of the Horn of Africa. When you have one country or one nation divided and fragmented from within, it's Somaliland, it's Puntland, it's Banadrland, it's so many lands, but beyond that, it's fragmented into clans, into tribes, into warlordism. That is very sad, and that reality has its effect on the Horn of Africa. Somalia is no other country. It's not like Eritrea. It's more than any other nation in the country. The instability in Somalia affects the stability of the whole region, and that's what we have witnessed the last 20 years. We would like Somalia to revive. We would like this nation to come to normalcy again and contribute to the stability in the region.
Talk about these UN Security Council sanctions against Eritrea. Why did the UN impose them, and is it necessary to keep those sanctions on Eritrea?
So Eritrea was sanctioned twice. The first time it was for providing support to the Somali al-Qaeda-linked rebel group al-Shabaab. You know, I'm a long-standing expert on the Somali conflict, and I traveled in Somalia at the height of the fighting with al-Shabaab in Mogadishu. And I have to say that I've asked a lot of Somalis about whether Eritrea was a key driver of the conflict in Somalia. I've never heard a single one of them say yes.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is they don't have the ability to do very much, even if they wanted to. It's unrealistic to think that they could be a big supporter of the Somali insurgents.
It is, you know, and what's more baffling is that if you ask Somalis whether Ethiopia is the primary driver of the conflict, almost every one of them will say yes. And yet Ethiopia has been lauded for its activities in Somalia, and Eritrea has been sanctioned.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it goes to the extent to which politics have influenced our perception of the conflict in Somalia. In my opinion, there's no grounds for maintaining those sanctions on Eritrea. And I think even the United Nations Monitoring Group would agree with that at this point. They don't have any evidence that Eritrea is supporting al-Shabaab or has in recent years, period.
As many as 700 migrants are feared dead.
It appears that this latest migrant boat tragedy in the Mediterranean is the worst of its kind.
Rescuers continued to search a wide area off the coast of Libya.
Well, Bronwyn Bruton, by way of talking about Eritrea, let me ask you a question that involves Eritrean refugees. We're reading in the press that about 1/2 of the people on the vessel that drowned crossing the Mediterranean en route to Italy were from Eritrea. Eritreans are second only to Syrians in the number of boat arrivals, even though the country is a fraction of Syria's size and there's no civil war in Eritrea.
But I have to say, too, that not all the people who claim to be Eritrean refugees are actually Eritrean refugees. When I hear a number of like 400 people on a boat, I have to suspect that at least some of those people were actually refugees from other countries, taking advantage of Europe's automatic asylum policy. If you're from Eritrea, or if you can convince a refugee officer that you're from Eritrea, you get an automatic green card in Europe, no questions asked. And that means that Sudanese, Ethiopians, Somalis, everybody has an incentive to walk through this open door from some of the poorest countries in the world to some of the richest countries in the world.
I see. Well, that's a very good point.